I needed this job. Needed it bad enough that when the guy on Craigslist said night shift warehouse work, no experience required, I didn't ask many questions. Should have been a red flag, but my landlord wasn't interested in red flags. He wanted $800 by Friday or I was out. The warehouse sat in an industrial district south of Seattle, bigger than I'd expected. 3 stories of concrete and steel, windows too high and dirty to see through. I pulled into the parking lot at 11:45 and counted maybe 6 other cars scattered across enough spaces for 200. The place looked like it could swallow a city block. I grabbed my jacket and walked toward the main entrance. The air smelled like diesel and something metallic I couldn't place. Security lights cast long shadows between the loading docks, and I could hear machinery humming somewhere inside the building. A man waited by the employee entrance, checking his watch. Had to be Ernest Green, the supervisor who'd called me back after my interview. He was shorter than me, but built solid, the kind of guy who'd been doing physical work his whole life. Graying hair, weathered face, work boots that had seen better years. "You Bill?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Bill Davis." He looked me over once, taking in my worn jeans and faded t-shirt. "You're on time. That's good. Follow me." Ernest badged us through the entrance and led me into a hallway lined with lockers and safety notices. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and I could hear that machinery sound getting louder. "You ever work warehouse before?" he asked as we walked. "Some. Loading trucks, inventory, that kind of thing." "This is different." He stopped at a door marked Authorized Personnel Only and swiped his badge again. "Night shift here has its own rules. You follow them exactly, you'll be fine. You don't, you won't last." The door opened into the main warehouse floor, and I stopped walking. The place was massive. Rows of shelving stretched up 3 stories, disappearing into shadows the overhead lights couldn't reach. Forklifts sat parked between aisles, and conveyor belts snaked between sections of racking. But what got my attention were the boxes. Thousands of them. All identical brown cardboard, no company logos, no shipping labels I could see. They filled the shelves in perfect rows, and there had to be tens of thousands of them. "What's in all the boxes?" I asked. Ernest kept walking. "Not your concern. You're here to do inventory counts and security patrols. That's it." We passed through an aisle where the boxes were stacked floor to ceiling. Up close, they looked even stranger. No barcodes, no product codes, just plain brown cardboard sealed with clear tape. Some of the boxes on the higher shelves looked old, like they'd been sitting there for years. "How long has this place been operating?" "Long enough." Ernest stopped at a workstation with a computer terminal and clipboard. "This is your starting point. You'll patrol sections A through F on the ground floor. Check the inventory numbers every hour, make sure nothing's out of place." He handed me a laminated card about the size of a driver's license. "Before we go any further, you need to read this. These are the rules for night shift. Follow them exactly." I looked down at the card. 5 rules were printed in bold black text. 1. Do not respond to voices calling your name over the PA system between midnight and 6 a.m. 2. If you see someone in a red uniform, do not make eye contact and leave the area immediately. 3. Stay in designated patrol areas only. Do not enter sections G, H, or I under any circumstances. 4. If the temperature drops suddenly, find the nearest exit and wait outside until it returns to normal. 5. Report any boxes that appear to be moving or making sounds to your supervisor immediately. I read through the list twice. None of it made sense. "What kind of voices?" I asked. "The kind you don't want to answer." "And the red uniform thing?" Ernest took the card back and looked at me with those deep-set blue eyes. "Bill, I'm going to tell you something and you need to listen carefully. This job pays $22 an hour because most people can't handle it. The ones who follow the rules do fine. The ones who don't," he shrugged, "they don't last long." "What happened to the last guy?" "He didn't follow the rules." I wanted to ask more questions, but Ernest was already moving again. He led me through the patrol route, showing me the inventory stations and explaining how to log the counts. The whole time those boxes watched from the shelves, at least that's how it felt. "You'll have a radio," he said, clipping a walkie-talkie to my belt. "Channel 3. I'll be in the office most of the night, but I make rounds too. You have problems, you call me right away." We finished the tour back at the main workstation. Ernest checked his watch again. 11:58. "Your shift starts in 2 minutes. Remember what I told you about the rules?" "Yeah, but—" "No buts. You follow them exactly, or you find another job. Understood?" I nodded. $22 an hour was more than I'd made anywhere else, and I needed every penny. "Understood." Ernest walked toward the office area, his footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. I stood alone in the massive space, surrounded by thousands of identical boxes and the constant hum of machinery. The overhead lights created pools of brightness separated by stretches of shadow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the dark spaces between the shelves. I picked up the clipboard and started my first patrol. Section A was closest to the main entrance, rows of shelving filled with those unmarked boxes. The inventory numbers were printed on small tags attached to each shelf. I counted boxes, checked numbers, and tried not to think about the rules card. Section B was deeper into the warehouse. The lighting wasn't as good here, and the shadows seemed darker. I found myself walking faster than I needed to, eager to get back to the brighter areas. The boxes all looked the same, but some seemed older than others. A few had dust on them, like they'd been sitting untouched for months. By the time I reached Section C, I'd started to relax a little. It was just inventory work, even if the place felt weird. I could handle weird for $22 an hour. That's when the PA system crackled to life. Static filled the air for a few seconds, then cleared. A voice came through the speakers, distorted, but definitely human. It sounded like someone calling for help, urgent and desperate. The words were hard to make out, but I could hear my name mixed in with the pleading. "Bill, please, help me." I stopped walking. The voice continued, getting clearer. "Bill, I need help. Please, I'm trapped. Can you hear me?" My hand moved toward the radio on my belt. Someone was in trouble, calling for help. That was the normal thing to do, right? Answer when someone needed help. Then I remembered the first rule. Do not respond to voices calling your name over the PA system between midnight and 6 a.m. I checked my watch. 12:23. The voice kept calling, more desperate now. "Bill, please. I know you can hear me. I need help. Please, answer." I covered my ears with my hands and kept walking. The voice followed me through the speakers, getting louder and more frantic. It sounded real, sounded human, sounded like someone was actually in trouble somewhere in the building. But the rule was clear: don't respond. I made it to Section D with my hands still over my ears. The voice continued for another minute, then cut off abruptly. The warehouse went quiet except for the machinery hum. I stood there for a long time, hands shaking a little. What if someone really had needed help? What if I'd just ignored someone in actual trouble because of some weird rule? Footsteps echoed from the main aisle. Ernest appeared around the corner, walking toward me with that same serious expression. "You heard it," he said. "It wasn't a question. Someone was calling for help. They knew my name." "And what did you do?" I didn't answer, like the rule said. Ernest nodded. "Good. That's exactly what you were supposed to do. But what if someone really needed help? They didn't." He stopped next to me and looked toward the speakers mounted on the ceiling. "That voice isn't meant for you, Bill. It's not meant for anyone who works here." I stood there next to Ernest, trying to make sense of what he'd just told me. The voice knew my name but wasn't meant for anyone who worked here. That didn't add up. "How long has this been happening?" I asked. "Long enough." Ernest checked his watch. "You should get back to your patrol. Don't let one incident throw you off schedule." He walked away without another word, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. I watched him disappear around the corner toward the supervisor's office, leaving me alone again with thousands of identical boxes and too many questions. I pulled out my clipboard and got back to work. Section D had 237 boxes on the first level, same as my count from 20 minutes ago. Nothing had moved, nothing looked different, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The radio on my belt crackled with static every few minutes. Normal warehouse chatter, Ernest checking in with other supervisors, someone reporting a completed inventory count from Section K, standard night shift communication. I moved into Section E and started counting again. 115 boxes on shelf level 1, 43 on level 2, 68 on level 3. All the numbers matched my previous count. The warehouse felt bigger now, more empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows between the aisles. My footsteps seemed louder than before, echoing off the high ceiling and concrete walls. At 12:45, I heard voices, not over the PA system this time. Real voices coming from somewhere ahead of me, a man and woman talking, their words unclear but their tones sharp, angry. I stopped walking and listened. The voices were coming from aisle 12, maybe 50 feet away. The man's voice got louder. The woman started crying. This wasn't part of the rules. Ernest hadn't said anything about other people being in the warehouse during night shift. The employee parking lot only had 6 cars, and I'd met the supervisors during orientation. Night shift was supposed to be a skeleton crew. I walked toward the voices. The argument was getting heated. The man was yelling now, his words echoing off the metal shelving. The woman's crying turned into sobs. "Please don't," she said. Her voice carried clearly through the warehouse. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Too late for that," the man replied. His voice was cold, threatening. I picked up my pace. Someone was in trouble. I didn't care what the rules said about staying in my designated patrol area. If someone needed help, I was going to help them. I rounded the corner into aisle 12 and saw them. A man in a dark jacket standing over a woman who was backed against a shipping container. She was maybe 30 years old, blonde hair, wearing jeans and a sweater. He was older, bigger, with his hands clenched into fists. "You always do this," he said. "You always make promises you can't keep." "I tried," she said through her tears. "I really tried this time. Not good enough." He raised his hand like he was going to hit her. She flinched and turned away, pressing herself against the metal container. I started forward. "Hey!" Then I remembered the second rule, the one Ernest had mentioned in passing when he handed me the laminated card. Something about avoiding people who were arguing, something about hiding. I stopped walking and pulled the card from my pocket. Rule number 2. If you encounter people arguing or fighting, do not intervene. Hide immediately and wait for them to leave. The woman was still crying, the man was still yelling, and I was supposed to hide. I looked around and spotted a gap between 2 shelving units about 10 feet away, wide enough for me to squeeze through. I could crouch there and wait for security to show up, or for the argument to end on its own. But the woman was scared, really scared, and the man looked like he was going to hurt her. I took another step toward them. I said I was sorry, the woman pleaded. "What else do you want me to do?" "You know what you need to do," the man said. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "You've always known." That's when I remembered Ernest's expression when he talked about the rules. Dead serious. Like following them was a matter of life and death. I backed away from the argument and ducked behind the nearest shelf. The metal was cold against my back as I crouched down, trying to make myself invisible. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. The argument continued. The man's voice got angrier. The woman's sobs got louder. I pressed my hands over my ears, but I could still hear everything. "Please," she kept saying, "please don't do this." "You brought this on yourself," he replied. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to think about anything else. The rent I needed to pay, The job I couldn't afford to lose. The rules I was supposed to follow if I wanted to keep working here. But all I could hear was the woman crying. The voices got louder, more desperate. The man was shouting now, his words echoing through the entire warehouse. The woman was screaming. Then everything went quiet. Complete silence. No voices, no crying, no footsteps. I waited 30 seconds, then cautiously looked around the edge of the shelf. Aisle 12 was empty. No man in the dark jacket, no blonde woman in the sweater, no shipping container where she'd been pressed against the wall. Just empty space and the same brown boxes that filled every other aisle in the warehouse. I stood up slowly, my legs shaky from crouching. I walked into the aisle where they'd been standing. The concrete floor showed no signs that anyone had been there. No scuff marks, no tears, nothing. I checked my watch, 12:58. The entire incident had lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. My radio crackled. "Bill, what's your location?" Ernest's voice. I grabbed the radio from my belt. "Section E, just finished my count. Head back to the main office, need to check in with you." On my way, I walked back through the aisles past sections D and C and B, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. 2 people having an argument, a woman in danger, then nothing, like they'd never been there at all. Ernest was waiting for me in the main office, a small room near the employee entrance with a desk, 2 chairs, and a bank of security monitors. He looked up when I walked in, and his expression was serious. "How's your first night going?" he asked. I thought about lying, telling him everything was fine, that I was just doing my patrol and counting boxes like I was supposed to. Instead, I told him the truth. I heard people arguing, in aisle 12, a man and woman. It sounded like he was going to hurt her. Ernest's face went pale. He set down the clipboard he'd been holding and looked at me directly. "What did you do?" I was going to help, but then I remembered the second rule, about hiding from people who are arguing. And? I hid behind a shelf until they stopped. Ernest nodded slowly. "How long did the argument last?" "Maybe 10 minutes. Then it went quiet. When I looked, they were gone." "Both of them?" "Yeah, like they were never there." Ernest was quiet for a long moment. He walked over to the security monitors and checked the feeds from different sections of the warehouse. All empty, all normal. "You did the right thing," he said finally. "But what if she really needed help? What if he hurt her?" Ernest turned back to me. His expression was grim. "Their arguments always end badly, Bill. Always. And there's nothing you or I or anyone else can do to change that." "Who are they?" "People who used to work here. People who didn't follow the rules." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What happened to them?" "They had an argument, a bad one, right here in the warehouse." Ernest sat down at his desk and rubbed his forehead. "Management tried to intervene, tried to help. It didn't work out well for anyone involved." "So they're what? Ghosts?" "I don't know what they are. I just know they show up sometimes, usually when we have new employees, and their arguments always end the same way." "Which is?" Ernest looked at me for a long moment. "Badly. That's why we have the rule about hiding. That's why you don't intervene. Because their problems aren't your problems, and getting involved won't help anyone." I thought about the woman's voice. How scared she sounded. How desperate. "You were right to hide," Ernest continued. "Some of the rules might seem strange, but they're there for good reasons. They keep you safe." "Safe from what?" "From things that aren't your responsibility to fix." He handed me a bottle of water from a small refrigerator in the corner. "Take a 5-minute break, then get back to your patrol. You've got sections F through A to finish before your next check-in." I took the water and sat down in the spare chair. The office felt normal, safe, like the rest of the world where arguments between strangers didn't just disappear into thin air. "Ernest?" "Yeah? How many rules are there really?" He looked at the security monitors again. "More than 5. but 5 is enough to get you started. And if I follow them, then you'll do fine here. This is a good job, Bill. Steady pay, decent benefits. Most nights are quiet. Most nights, not all nights. I finished the water and stood up. I should get back to work. Good man. Radio if you need anything. I'll be making rounds through sections G and H. The sections I wasn't allowed to enter. I wanted to ask why, but I figured I'd learned enough new information for one night. I walked back onto the warehouse floor. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The boxes sat silent on their shelves. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't stop thinking about the woman's voice. How real she'd sounded, how scared. I started my count in section F. 189 boxes on level 1, 73 on level 2, 112 on level 3. All the numbers matched my previous counts. The warehouse felt different now, bigger, more empty, like it was holding secrets in every aisle, behind every stack of identical brown boxes. I needed this job. $800 by Friday, or I'd be looking for a new place to live. $22 an hour was good money for night shift work, better than anything else I'd been able to find. But as I walked through the aisles, counting boxes and checking inventory numbers, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that somewhere in the darkness between the towering shelves, things were moving that I couldn't see. The building creaked and settled around me. Pipes groaned in the walls. The ventilation system hummed. Normal warehouse sounds, I told myself. Nothing unusual, but every shadow seemed deeper now. Every echo seemed to last longer, and I found myself looking over my shoulder more often, checking corners and empty aisles for movement that shouldn't be there. The night was going to be longer than I'd expected. I moved through section F, checking the numbers on my clipboard against what I could see on the shelves. 189 boxes on level 1. 73 on level 2, 112 on level 3. Everything matched what I'd counted before. The warehouse felt different now. Maybe it was knowing about the voices on the PA system, or seeing those two people argue and then vanish. Maybe it was just the way sound carried in here, bouncing off concrete walls and metal shelving until you couldn't tell where anything was coming from. I finished section F and started walking toward the electronics area. Ernest had mentioned it during the brief tour earlier, though we hadn't gone through it in detail. It sat between the main warehouse floor and the loading docks, a separate section with different kinds of inventory. The electronics section was smaller than the others, maybe half the size of section A. The shelving was different too, shorter, only 2 levels high instead of 3. The boxes here looked newer, and some actually had labels on them. Nothing I could read from a distance, just small white stickers with numbers and codes. I pulled out my clipboard and started counting. Level 1 had 47 boxes. I wrote that down and moved to the next aisle. Level 2 had 32 boxes. The numbers were smaller here, easier to keep track of. That's when I heard it. The crash came from somewhere behind me, back toward the main warehouse floor. Not a small sound, like a box falling off a shelf. This was big, loud enough that it echoed through the whole building and seemed to go on for several seconds. I stopped walking and listened. The echo faded, but I could hear what sounded like things still shifting and settling, like when you knock over a stack of books and they keep sliding around even after the initial crash. My first thought was to radio Ernest. My second thought was to stay where I was and mind my own business. I'd already had enough weird experiences for one night, but then I remembered the laminated card in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the rules again. Rule 3. If you hear loud crashes or breaking sounds, investigate immediately. Running toward the noise is mandatory, not optional. Running toward the noise. That went against every instinct I had, but the card was clear about it. Mandatory, not optional. I clipped the radio back to my belt and started walking toward where the crash had come from. My footsteps echoed on the concrete floor, and I found myself moving faster than I meant to. Not quite running, but close. The sound had come from somewhere in the main warehouse area, past Section A. I could see the tall shelving units ahead of me, and as I got closer, I could see something was wrong. One of the aisles looked different, blocked. I turned the corner into aisle 7 and stopped. A massive stack of boxes had toppled over, completely blocking the pathway from floor to ceiling. The boxes were scattered everywhere, some split open with their contents spilled across the concrete. Others were stacked at weird angles, leaning against the shelving on both sides. The aisle was maybe 6 feet wide normally. Now there was no way through at all. The fallen boxes created a wall that went up at least 12 feet, maybe more. Some of the higher shelves looked empty now, like they'd lost their entire load. I stood there for a minute, trying to figure out what had happened. The boxes weren't just fallen, they were everywhere. Some had bounced or rolled 20 feet from where they'd started. Others were crushed under the weight of the ones that had landed on top of them. But the weird thing was how it felt. Standing there looking at the mess, I had this strong feeling that something terrible would have happened if I hadn't come to check. Not just that the aisle would stay blocked, but something worse. Something that would have affected more than just the inventory. I couldn't explain it. It was just this certainty that responding quickly had been important. Really important. I set my clipboard down and started moving boxes. The ones on top were lighter, mostly empty or half full. I could lift them by myself and stack them against the wall where they wouldn't block the aisle. The heavier ones at the bottom would be harder, but I had to start somewhere. 20 minutes in, I was sweating and my back was starting to ache. I'd cleared maybe a third of the mess, enough to make a narrow pathway through the middle. The boxes I'd moved were stacked along both walls in neat piles, sorted by size and weight. Some of the boxes had split open when they fell. I could see what was inside a few of them, electronic parts mostly, circuit boards and cables and things I couldn't identify. Nothing that looked expensive or fragile, but I tried to be careful anyway. The work was mindless in a good way. Pick up a box, check if it was damaged, stack it with the others. Repeat. It kept my hands busy and gave me something to focus on besides the strange things that had already happened tonight. I was moving one of the heavier boxes when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw Ernest walking toward me down the aisle. He looked at the mess, then at me, then at the neat stacks of boxes I'd arranged along the walls. "Heard the crash from the office," he said. "How long you been working on this?" "About 30 minutes," I said. I wiped sweat off my forehead with the back of my hand. "Still got maybe 10 minutes of work left." Ernest nodded and stepped closer to look at the remaining pile. "You did good responding fast," he said. "Real good. The card said it was mandatory." "It is." He picked up one of the smaller boxes and added it to my stack. But some people hesitate anyway, think maybe they heard wrong, or it's not their job, or someone else will handle it. "What happens if you don't respond?" Ernest was quiet for a moment. He lifted another box, this one heavier, and grunted a little as he set it down. "Things get worse," he said. "A lot worse." "Worse how?" "Hard to explain." Ernest looked at the remaining pile of boxes. "Let's just say you avoided something tonight, something that would have affected more than just this aisle." That matched the feeling I'd had earlier, like responding quickly had been important in a way I couldn't understand. We worked together for the next 10 minutes, moving the last of the fallen boxes and clearing the aisle completely. Ernest was stronger than he looked, and he knew how to lift heavy things without straining his back. The work went faster with 2 people. When we finished, the aisle looked normal again. The boxes were stacked neatly along the walls in organized piles, and there was a clear pathway down the middle. You could still see scuff marks on the concrete where things had fallen, but otherwise there was no sign anything had happened. "Good work," Ernest said. He checked his watch. "You should get back to your patrol. Still got sections to cover before your next check-in." I picked up my clipboard from where I'd left it and looked at my notes. I'd been in the middle of counting the electronics section when the crash happened. "Should I finish the electronics area first?" "Yeah, finish what you started. Then move on to automotive parts. That's the next section on your route." Ernest walked away, back toward the main office. I watched him go, then turned and headed back to the electronics section. My back was sore from all the lifting, but it felt good to have done something useful, something that had actually mattered. The electronics section seemed smaller now, less intimidating. I found where I'd left off and continued counting boxes. Level 1, Level 2. The numbers were easy to track, and I finished the whole section in about 15 minutes. The automotive parts section was next. It was larger than electronics, but smaller than the main warehouse areas. The shelving here was different again, metal racks instead of the wooden shelves I'd seen elsewhere. The boxes were a mix of sizes, some small enough to hold in one hand, others that would take 2 people to lift. I started at the first aisle and began counting. 53 boxes on Level 1, 38 on Level 2. I wrote the numbers down and moved to the next aisle. That's when I saw him. At the far end of the aisle, maybe 60 feet away, a man was standing with his back to me. He was examining the shelves, running his hand along the edge of one of the metal racks like he was looking for something specific. He was wearing a red coat, bright red, the kind of color you'd notice from across a parking lot. It came down to about his waist, and it looked expensive, well made. I remembered Rule 4 from the laminated card. Never make eye contact with the man in the red coat. If you see him, turn around and walk away immediately. I didn't wait to see his face. I turned around and walked back the way I'd come, moving as quickly as I could without running. My footsteps echoed on the concrete, and I had to fight the urge to look over my shoulder. The main warehouse floor felt safer somehow. I walked through Section A, then Section B, checking my clipboard and pretending to count boxes, but I wasn't really focusing on the work. I kept thinking about the man in the red coat, wondering what would have happened if I'd stayed, if I'd tried to talk to him or gotten close enough to see his face. The laminated card had been clear about it. Never make eye contact. Turn around and walk away immediately. No exceptions, no explanations. I spent the next 20 minutes working in Section C, actually counting boxes this time. 147 on Level 1, 92 on Level 2, 131 on Level 3. The numbers helped me focus, gave me something concrete to think about. But I kept glancing back toward the automotive parts section. I couldn't see it from where I was, but I kept expecting to see a flash of red coat moving between the shelves, or to hear footsteps that weren't mine echoing through the warehouse. When I finally worked up the courage to go back to automotive parts, the man in the red coat was gone. I walked through every aisle, checking behind shelving units, and looking down the longer corridors that connected to other sections. Nothing. The section was completely empty except for the boxes and the metal shelving. No sign anyone had been there at all. I kept moving through the sections, checking my clipboard every few minutes. The rest of the night stretched ahead of me, and I couldn't shake what Ernest had said about the rules being survival instructions. Section A again. I'd lost count of how many times I'd walked these aisles. The boxes looked the same as they had hours ago. Brown cardboard, no labels, stacked neat and orderly on the metal shelving. But now I found myself studying each one more carefully. Rule 5 kept running through my head. Report any boxes that move or make sounds. I'd read it a dozen times on the laminated card, but I hadn't really thought about what it meant until now. Boxes don't move on their own. Boxes don't make sounds, unless they do here. I walked slower now, listening. The warehouse had its usual background noise, the hum of fluorescent lights, the distant sound of Ernest's radio crackling from the office, my own footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. But I was listening for something else, something that shouldn't be there. Section B, 163 boxes on Level 1, 87 on Level 2, 212 on Level 3, all the same counts I'd been getting all night. I marked the numbers on my clipboard and moved on. The PA system stayed quiet, no more voices calling my name, no more pleading for help from someone who wasn't really there. That was something, at least. Section C next. I'd been through here so many times I could probably count the boxes with my eyes closed. But I kept my eyes open, scanning each shelf, each stack, looking for the one that didn't belong. What would an unlabeled box look like in a warehouse full of unlabeled boxes? I'd been wondering about that for hours. Maybe it would be a different color, maybe a different size. Maybe it would just feel wrong somehow, the way the man in the red coat had felt wrong. I finished section C and headed toward D. My legs were getting tired. I'd been walking for over 6 hours, and the concrete floor wasn't doing my feet any favors, but I kept going. Ernest had made it clear that stopping wasn't an option. The radio on my belt crackled. "Bill, you copy?" I unclipped it and pressed the button. "Yeah, I'm here. Everything quiet on your end?" "So far." "Good. Keep it that way." The radio went silent. I clipped it back to my belt and kept walking. Section D looked the same as always. 237 boxes on the first level. I started counting the second level when I heard something. A soft thud. I stopped walking, listened. The sound came again, thud, like something settling or shifting. I looked up at the shelving above me. The boxes sat in their neat rows exactly where they'd been all night. Nothing looked different. Nothing looked out of place. But the sound came again. Definitely a thud. Definitely coming from somewhere nearby. I walked toward the sound, checking each aisle. The boxes stared back at me, brown and silent and ordinary. Whatever had made the noise, I couldn't find it. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe 6 hours of walking through this place was getting to me. I went back to counting. Section E, Section F, back to electronics. The shorter shelves here made me feel less exposed, but I still found myself glancing over my shoulder every few minutes, looking for red coats, listening for voices that knew my name. The hours crawled by. 3 in the morning became 4. 4 became 5. My clipboard was full of numbers, all the same counts I'd been getting since I started. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. It wasn't like seeing the man in the red coat or hearing the couple arguing. This was subtler. Just a sense that I wasn't alone, even when the aisles were empty, like something was keeping pace with me, staying just out of sight. I tried to ignore it, did my counts, marked my numbers, followed my route, but the feeling stayed with me, a constant itch between my shoulder blades. 5:15. The night was almost over. I'd made it through without finding any moving boxes, without hearing any more voices, without running into anyone else in red coats. That had to count for something. 5:30. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter now, or maybe I was just getting used to them. The warehouse looked the same as it had when I'd started. Endless rows of brown boxes stretching up toward the ceiling. But it felt different, more familiar, less threatening. Or maybe I was just too tired to be scared anymore. 5:45. My legs ached, my back ached. My feet felt like I'd been walking on concrete for 6 hours, which I had. But I kept going. One more section, one more count, one more check of the clipboard. I was in Section A when I heard footsteps that weren't mine. Ernest appeared at the end of the aisle, walking toward me with that same steady pace he'd had all night. He looked tired too, but alert, like he'd been awake for the same 6 hours I had, watching and waiting and making sure nothing went wrong. "How you holding up?" he asked when he reached me. "Tired," I said, "but okay." He nodded. "Good. You've got about 10 minutes left. Finish up Section A and head back to the office. What about the rest of my route? Day shift takes over at 6. You're done." I felt a wave of relief I hadn't expected. 6 hours had felt like 12. "Okay?" Ernest started to walk away, then stopped. "Bill." "Yeah? You did good tonight, better than I expected." I wasn't sure what to say to that. "Thanks." He nodded and headed back toward the office. I finished counting Section A, same numbers as always, and followed him. The office felt different at 6 in the morning. The security monitors still showed empty aisles and neat rows of boxes, but the light coming through the high windows had changed. Dawn was breaking outside, turning the warehouse from a place of shadows into something that looked almost normal. Almost. Ernest was sitting at his desk, filling out paperwork. He looked up when I came in. "How was your first night?" he asked. I thought about that. How was my first night? I'd heard voices that weren't there. I'd seen people who disappeared. I'd hidden from a man in a red coat and spent 6 hours looking for boxes that moved on their own. "Confusing," I said finally, "and terrifying." Ernest smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "Yeah, it usually is. But I followed the rules." "You did. That's why you're still here." There was something in the way he said it that made me ask, what happened to the people who didn't follow the rules? Ernest was quiet for a long moment. "Some of them quit. Some of them—" He shrugged. "Some of them didn't make it to morning." I felt cold suddenly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, the rules aren't suggestions, Bill. They're not guidelines or safety recommendations. They're the only thing standing between you and whatever's in this place at night." I looked at the laminated card in my hand. 5 simple rules. Don't respond to voices. Hide from people. Stay in your area. Avoid temperature drops. Report moving boxes. They seemed so basic, so straightforward. "How many rules are there really?" I asked. "More than 5, but 5's enough to start. Most people don't make it past the first night anyway. And the ones who do? They learn, they adapt, they figure out how to survive." Ernest stood up and gathered his papers. "Come on, I'll walk you out." We left the office together and headed toward the employee entrance. The hallway looked the same as it had when I'd arrived, but everything felt different now. The safety notices on the walls seemed more urgent. The lockers looked like they belonged to people who might not come back. "Will you be here tomorrow night?" I asked. "Every night," Ernest said. "Someone has to make sure the new people don't get themselves killed." We reached the door. Ernest badged us out, and I stepped into the parking lot. The morning air was cool and clean, nothing like the stale warehouse atmosphere I'd been breathing all night. The sun was just coming up over the industrial buildings, painting everything in soft orange light. It should have felt like relief, like escape. But looking back at the massive concrete building, I felt something else entirely. Dread. Because I knew I'd be back tomorrow night. I needed the money too badly to quit, and Ernest had made it clear that people who lasted past the first night had a chance of surviving. I'd followed the rules exactly as he'd told me. I'd hidden when I was supposed to hide, ignored voices when I was supposed to ignore them, stayed where I was supposed to stay. But I'd also learned that the warehouse wasn't just a place where strange things happened. It was a place where those strange things were hunting for people who didn't know how to protect themselves. "Bill," Ernest said as I started walking toward my car. I turned back. "You survived your first shift. That's more than I can say for some of the others." The words should have been encouraging. Instead, they made me think about all the people who hadn't made it to 6 in the morning. All the people who'd broken the rules or ignored the warnings or just been unlucky enough to be in the wrong place when something decided to come looking for them. I got in my car and drove away, watching the warehouse shrink in my rearview mirror. But even as the building disappeared behind other industrial structures, I could still feel it. Like it was watching me go. Like it was already counting down the hours until I came back. The early morning light made everything look normal. The empty streets, the chain-link fences, the rows of identical buildings. But I knew better now. I knew that when the sun went down and the day shift went home, the warehouse would wake up again, and all the things I'd seen and heard would be waiting. The rules weren't just guidelines, they were survival instructions, and tomorrow night, I'd need them again. I was ready to badge out and get the hell away from this place when I heard it. "Bill Davis." The voice came from somewhere behind us, soft but clear enough that there wasn't any question about what it said. My name, spoken in a whisper that made every muscle in my body go tight. I stopped walking. The sound hit me wrong. made my skin feel like something was crawling underneath it. Not the PA system this time. This was different, closer, like someone standing maybe 20 feet back in the shadows between the shelving units. Bill Davis. There it was again. Same tone, same careful pronunciation of both my first and last name. The voice sounded almost familiar, like someone I should recognize but couldn't quite place. A woman's voice, I thought. Young, maybe scared. Every instinct I had told me to turn around, look back toward the warehouse floor, see who was calling my name. The urge was so strong I actually started to pivot on my heel before I caught myself. The rules. I'd spent the whole night learning about the rules. Don't respond to voices calling your name. That was Rule 1. The first thing Ernest had told me about surviving this job. I forced myself to keep walking toward the employee entrance. My legs felt heavy, like I was moving through thick water. The voice behind us called my name a third time, and this time there was something desperate in it, pleading. Bill Davis, please. Ernest's hand landed on my shoulder, firm grip, steering me forward. Don't look back, he said quietly. Just keep walking. His voice was steady, but I could hear the tension underneath. He'd heard it too. This wasn't just my imagination or first night nerves. Something was back there in the warehouse, calling my name, wanting me to turn around. But what if... No. Ernest's grip tightened on my shoulder. Whatever you're thinking, the answer is no. Keep walking. I wanted to ask him who it was. Wanted to know if this was like the PA announcement from earlier, or the arguing couple in aisle 12, or something else entirely. But the way Ernest was pushing me forward told me this wasn't the time for questions. Bill Davis. The voice was getting fainter now, like whoever was calling was falling behind. But there was something new in the tone. Anger, maybe, or disappointment, like I'd failed some kind of test by not responding. My feet wanted to stop, turn around, go back and see what was calling to me. The pull was almost physical, like a rope tied around my chest, tugging me backward toward the warehouse floor. I had to concentrate on each step to keep moving in the right direction. That's it, Ernest said, almost there. The employee entrance was maybe 30 feet ahead, the same door I'd walked through 6 hours ago, back when I thought this was going to be a normal security job, back when the biggest worry I had was whether I could stay awake all night. Bill Davis, don't leave me here. The voice was definitely fainter now, but the words hit me like a punch to the gut. Don't leave me here, like someone was trapped, like someone needed help and I was walking away. I slowed down. Ernest felt it immediately. No, he said, don't even think about it. What if someone actually needs help? They don't. His voice was flat, certain. Trust me on this one. Whatever's back there calling your name, it doesn't need help. It needs you to turn around. And if you do that, you won't make it to the door. I looked at his face. He wasn't joking, wasn't exaggerating. Ernest had been working here for years, and right now he looked more worried than I'd seen him all night, including when I'd heard the PA announcement and when I'd told him about the arguing couple. Bill Davis. Fainter still, almost like an echo now, but still there, still calling. I kept walking. Each step felt like I was fighting against something trying to pull me backward. My shoulders were tense, waiting for the voice to get louder again, waiting for footsteps behind us, waiting for something to grab my arm and spin me around. But nothing happened. We reached the employee entrance and Ernest pulled out his badge, the same motion I'd watched him do when we first entered the building. Smooth, practiced, automatic. The badge reader beeped. Green light. Ernest pushed the door open and gestured for me to go first. I stepped outside into the cool Seattle morning air and felt like I could breathe again. The parking lot looked exactly the same as when I'd arrived. 6 cars scattered across the asphalt. My beat-up Honda sitting under one of the security lights. The chain-link fence running along the perimeter. Everything normal and ordinary and safe. Ernest came out behind me and let the door swing shut. The The sound of it closing was final, solid, like a barrier between us and whatever had been calling my name from inside the warehouse. "Jesus," I said. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath. "You did good in there." Ernest was looking at me with something I hadn't seen before. Respect, maybe. Most people don't follow the rules so carefully on their first night. Most people? Some folks hear their name called and they turn around. Natural instinct. He shrugged. Those are the ones who don't make it to morning. I stared at him. "What happens if you turn around?" "Don't know. Never seen anyone come back to tell me about it." Ernest checked his watch. "Day shift'll be here in about 10 minutes. You should get going before the parking lot fills up." I started walking toward my car, then stopped. There was something I had to ask. "Ernest?" "Yeah?" "Will you be here tomorrow night?" "I'm here every night." He was already heading back toward the building, probably had paperwork to finish before the day's supervisor showed up. Someone's got to make sure the new guys don't get themselves killed. I got to my car and fumbled with the keys. My hands were steadier than I expected, but there was still some residual shakiness from whatever had just happened inside. I started the engine and backed out of the parking space. As I drove toward the exit, I glanced in my rearview mirror. Ernest was still standing by the employee entrance, watching me leave, making sure I actually made it off the property, maybe, or just making sure nothing followed me out. The warehouse looked different in the morning light, smaller somehow. Just another industrial building in a row of industrial buildings. Nothing special about it. Nothing that would make you think twice if you drove past it during the day. But I knew better now. I knew what happened inside when the sun went down and the day shift went home. I knew about the voices and the rules and the things that called your name from the shadows. I turned onto the main road and headed home. Traffic was starting to pick up. Early commuters heading to normal jobs where the biggest danger was maybe spilling coffee on your keyboard, where the employee handbook didn't include instructions on how to avoid getting killed by supernatural entities. My phone buzzed. Text message. I pulled over to check it. "Good work tonight. See you at 11:45 p.m. tomorrow. Ernest." I stared at the message for a long time. Tomorrow night. 24 hours from now, I'd be walking back through that employee entrance, back into the warehouse with its identical brown boxes and its 5 rules and its things that called your name from the darkness. The smart thing would be to find another job, something in retail, maybe, or food service, anything that didn't require me to spend 8 hours alone in a building where following the wrong instinct could get me killed. But I needed the money. Rent was due Friday, and I had exactly $43 in my checking account. No other job was going to pay $22 an hour to someone with my limited experience. No other job was going to solve my financial problems fast enough. I typed back, "I'll be there," sent the message, put the phone away, started driving again. Ernest had asked if I'd return tomorrow night. Despite everything I'd experienced, despite the voices and the rules and the feeling that something in that warehouse wanted to hurt me, I'd said yes, because I didn't have a choice. The job was necessary, the money was necessary, and apparently I was better at following the rules than most people. I drove through the empty streets, my hands steady on the wheel, but my mind racing. The city looked normal at 6 in the morning, coffee shops opening up, early commuters heading to work, joggers on the sidewalks. Nobody else knew what I'd just been through. Nobody else had spent the night walking around boxes that might move on their own, listening to voices that shouldn't exist, hiding from people who weren't really there. The Honda's engine made its usual rattling sound as I turned into my apartment complex. I parked in my assigned spot and sat there for a minute, looking at the building. 3 stories of beige, stucco, and brown trim. My unit was on the 2nd floor, rent due Friday. $800 I still didn't have, even after one night of work. I climbed the stairs to my apartment and unlocked the door. The place was exactly how I'd left it 12 hours ago. Small living room with a couch I'd bought used, kitchen table with bills stacked on it, bedroom barely big enough for a bed, normal, safe. No voices calling my name, no people in red coats, no boxes that might start moving around. I sat on the couch and pulled out my phone. The text from Ernest was still there. "Good work tonight. See you at 11:45 p.m. tomorrow. Ernest." I read it again. Tomorrow night felt like a long way off, but also too soon. I tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that woman's voice calling my name in the parking lot. "Bill Davis, don't leave me here." The way she'd sounded desperate, like she really needed help. Ernest had been sure she didn't. He'd been more worried than I'd seen him all night, which was saying something. Around noon, I gave up on sleep and made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with the bills spread out in front of me. Rent, electric, car insurance, phone, all due within the next 2 weeks. I did the math again, hoping it would come out different this time. It didn't. $22 an hour, 8 hours a night, 5 nights a week. That was $880 a week before taxes. Even with taxes taken out, it would cover everything and leave me with money left over. Real money, not the $43 currently in my checking account. I just had to survive the job. I spent the afternoon looking up the warehouse online, searched the address, the company name I'd seen on my paperwork, anything that might tell me what I was dealing with. Found almost nothing. A few business listings that didn't say much. No news articles about mysterious disappearances or workplace accidents. No reviews from former employees. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me more nervous. At 10:30 that night, I got back in the Honda and drove to the warehouse. The parking lot looked the same as the night before. 6 cars scattered across the asphalt, security lights casting long shadows, chain link fence around the perimeter. I parked in the same spot I'd used yesterday and walked to the employee entrance. Ernest was waiting for me. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept either. "You came back," he said. I said I would. He badged us in and we walked through the hallway lined with lockers. "Most people don't make it past the first night," he said. "Not because they can't do the work, because they can't handle what comes with it." We reached the main warehouse floor. The boxes stretched out in front of us, thousands of them stacked on shelving that went up 3 stories. In the fluorescent light, they looked harmless. Just cardboard boxes waiting to be counted. "Same patrol route tonight," Ernest said. "Sections A through F, hourly counts, radio check-ins. You remember the rules?" I pulled out the laminated card. "Don't respond to voices calling my name. Avoid eye contact with people in red uniforms. Stay in designated areas. Report sudden temperature drops. Report moving or sound-making boxes." "Good. Tonight might be different from last night. It usually is." "Different how?" Ernest checked his watch. "You'll find out. Remember, the rules aren't suggestions. They're the only thing keeping you alive in here." He handed me the clipboard, radio, and flashlight. "Start your patrol. I'll be in the office if you need me." I clipped the radio to my belt and walked into Section A. The boxes looked exactly the same as they had yesterday. Brown cardboard, no logos or labels, stacked neatly on wooden shelves. I started counting. Level 1, Level 2, Level 3. The numbers matched what I'd recorded the night before. At 12:15, while I was counting Section C, the PA system crackled to life. "Bill Davis," the voice said. It was different from yesterday. Male instead of female. Older, with a slight accent I couldn't place. "Bill Davis, we need to talk." I kept walking, eyes on my clipboard. The voice continued. "I know you can hear me, Bill. I know you're listening. We have something that belongs to you." I forced myself to keep counting boxes. 147 on Level 1, 92 on Level 2, 131 on Level 3. "Your father wants to see you, Bill. He's been waiting a long time." My pen stopped moving. My father had been dead for 6 years. "He's here with us, Bill. He wants to explain what really happened the night he died. He wants to tell you the truth." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The voice wasn't real. Whatever was speaking through the PA system knew things about me, but it wasn't my father. My father was dead and buried in Riverside Cemetery, and he wasn't waiting for me in a warehouse full of unmarked boxes. "Don't you want to know why he really crashed the car, Bill? Don't you want to know what he was running from?" I started walking again, faster this time. The voice followed me through the speakers. "He made a mistake, Bill. Just like you're making a mistake right now. He didn't listen when he should have. He didn't pay attention to the warnings." I reached the end of Section C and turned into Section D. The voice was getting louder, more insistent. "Come find us, Bill. Come to Section H. Your father is waiting." Section H. One of the areas I was specifically told never to enter. "Bill Davis," the voice said one more time. "Don't make the same mistake he did." The PA system went quiet. I stood in Section D, holding my clipboard with hands that were shaking now. The voice had known about my father. It had known how he died. Car accident on a rainy night 6 years ago, driving too fast on a winding road. The police said he'd probably fallen asleep at the wheel, but the voice was wrong about one thing. I wasn't going to Section H. I wasn't going anywhere except my designated patrol areas. I finished counting Section D and moved to Section E. My radio crackled. "Bill? You there?" Ernest's voice. "I'm here." "Everything okay?" I heard the voice again, on the PA. What did it say? I hesitated. It said my father was waiting for me in Section H. Static for a few seconds. Then Ernest came back on. "Your father's not in Section H, Bill. Whatever's in Section H isn't your father. You understand me?" "I understand." "Good. Stay in your patrol areas. I'll check on you in an hour." I continued my rounds, Section E, Section F, electronics, automotive parts. The warehouse stayed quiet except for the normal sounds. Fluorescent lights humming overhead, my footsteps on concrete, the occasional crackle from my radio. At 2:30, while I was walking through the automotive parts section, I heard footsteps behind me. Not my footsteps, someone else's. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped too. I started walking again. The footsteps started again, matching my pace exactly. I turned around. The aisle behind me was empty. I kept walking, listening carefully. The footsteps continued, staying about 10 feet behind me. Every time I stopped, they stopped. Every time I changed direction, they changed direction too. I reached for my radio. "Ernest, I've got a situation in automotive parts." "What kind of situation?" "Someone's following me. I can hear footsteps, but I don't see anyone." "Are you in your designated patrol area?" "Yes." "Then keep walking. Don't turn around again. Don't try to see who it is." "But what if—" "No what ifs, Bill. Keep walking and finish your patrol." I put the radio away and continued through automotive parts. The footsteps stayed with me, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, but always there. When I finished the section and moved back to the main warehouse floor, they stopped. At 4 in the morning, I was counting Section B when I heard a box fall. Not crash like the night before, just a single box hitting the floor somewhere behind me. I turned around and saw a brown cardboard box sitting in the middle of the aisle about 20 feet away. I walked over to it. The box was identical to all the others, but it was sitting by itself on the concrete floor. I looked up at the shelving above it. There was a gap on level 2 where a box should have been. I picked up the box. It was heavier than I expected, and something shifted inside when I moved it. Something that felt loose, like it was sliding around. I carried the box back to its spot on level 2 and pushed it into place. As soon as I let go, it fell again. I heard it hit the floor behind me before I'd even turned around. I picked it up again and put it back. This time I held it in place for a few seconds, making sure it was stable. The shelf was level and there was nothing wrong with the spot where the box belonged. I let go. The box stayed put. I took 3 steps away. The box fell again. I radioed Ernest. "I've got a box that keeps falling in Section B." "Falling how?" "I put it back on the shelf and it falls down 3 times now." "Don't touch it again. Mark the location on your clipboard and move to a different section." "What about the rule? Report moving boxes immediately." "You reported it. Now leave it alone." I wrote down the aisle number and shelf location on my clipboard. The box was still sitting on the floor when I left Section B. I could hear it hit the concrete again as I walked into Section C. The rest of the night passed without major incidents. A few strange sounds that I couldn't identify, shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them, the persistent feeling that I was being watched. But no more voices calling my name, no more people in red coats, no more boxes falling off shelves. At 5:45, Ernest appeared in Section A where I was finishing my final count. "Time to wrap up," he said. "How was night 2? "Weird, but I followed the rules." That's what matters. The voice on the PA, the footsteps, the falling box. All normal for this place. Normal? Normal for here. You handled it right. Most people would have gone looking for their father in Section H, or turned around to see who was following them, or kept messing with that box until something bad happened. We walked toward the employee entrance. I kept expecting to hear my name called again, but the warehouse stayed quiet. "Ernest," I said as we reached the door, "how long have you been working here?" 15 years. "Have you ever seen anyone who didn't follow the rules?" He badged us out and we stepped into the parking lot. Dawn was breaking over the industrial district, painting the sky gray and orange. "Yeah," he said, "I've seen what happens when people don't follow the rules." "What happens?" "They don't show up for work the next night and nobody ever sees them again." He started walking toward the building. "Get some sleep, Bill. See you tomorrow night." I drove home through the morning traffic, thinking about voices that knew my father's name and boxes that wouldn't stay on shelves. Night 2 was over. I'd survived by following the rules, just like Ernest said, but I was starting to understand that each night was going to be different. Each night was going to test me in new ways. I parked at my apartment complex and sat in the car for a minute, looking at the normal world around me. People heading to normal jobs, living normal lives, never having to worry about voices calling their names or mysterious figures in red coats. I envied them, but I needed the money more than I needed normal. I went upstairs and tried to sleep, knowing I'd be back at the warehouse in 16 hours. Over the next week, the incidents escalated. Night 3 brought a woman in a red dress who stood at the end of Section F just watching me work. I remembered the rule about avoiding eye contact and kept my head down, but I could feel her staring at me for over an hour before she finally disappeared. Night 4 was the temperature drop. I was counting boxes and electronics when the air suddenly got cold enough that I could see my breath. The fluorescent light started flickering, and frost began forming on the metal shelving. I left the section immediately and radioed Ernest, who told me to stay out of electronics for the rest of the night. Night 5 brought more voices on the PA system. Not just one voice this time, but multiple voices talking over each other, men, women, children, all calling my name and asking me to come find them. They claimed to be lost, trapped, hurt, dying. They begged me to help them. The voices lasted for 20 minutes, getting louder and more desperate, until they cut off all at once in the middle of a sentence. Each night, Ernest checked on me and confirmed I was following the rules correctly. Each night, he seemed a little more worried, like the incidents were getting worse than usual. "You're attracting attention," he told me after night 5. "Some people do that. The things in here notice them more than others." "What kind of things?" "Things that used to be people, things that were never people, things that are something in between." "Why don't you just shut this place down?" Ernest laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think we haven't tried?" This warehouse has been sold, condemned, demolished, and rebuilt 6 times in the last 40 years. Doesn't matter. The things that live here always come back. Night 6 was the worst yet. I was walking through Section A when I heard someone calling for help. Not over the PA system this time, but from somewhere in the warehouse. A man's voice, shouting that he was trapped and needed assistance. I started walking toward the voice, then caught myself. The rules didn't specifically mention people calling for help, but they did say to stay in designated patrol areas and not respond to voices. The man kept shouting. He sounded terrified, desperate. He said he was hurt and couldn't move. He said he'd been trapped for hours. I stood in Section A listening to someone who might be dying and forced myself not to move. The voice was coming from the direction of Section H, one of the areas I was forbidden to enter. The man screamed, a sound of pure agony that echoed through the warehouse. Then silence. I radioed Ernest. Someone was calling for help from Section H. No one was calling for help, Bill. No one is trapped in Section H. But I heard. You heard something that wanted you to think someone needed help. That's how it works. It finds what you care about and uses it against you. I finished my patrol that night, but I couldn't stop thinking about the man's screams. What if someone really had been trapped? What if I could have saved them? Ernest must have seen it in my face when he met me at the end of my shift. You did the right thing, he said as we walked to the exit. I know it doesn't feel like it, but you did the right thing. How can you be sure? Because I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've learned the difference between people who need help and things that pretend to need help. What you heard tonight wasn't human. Night 7 was quiet. Too quiet. I completed my entire patrol without a single incident. No voices, no footsteps, no falling boxes, no people in red clothes. The warehouse felt empty, almost normal. That worried me more than all the strange incidents combined. It's not over, Ernest warned me. Sometimes they go quiet for a night or two, building up to something bigger. He was right. Night 8 nearly killed me. I was walking through automotive parts when every light in the warehouse went out at once. Complete darkness, darker than anything I'd ever experienced. My flashlight was clipped to my belt, but when I reached for it, my hand found empty air. I heard breathing behind me, slow, deliberate breathing that definitely wasn't mine. I started walking in what I thought was the direction of the main aisle, moving slowly with my hands out in front of me. The breathing followed me, always about 5 feet behind. Bill Davis, a voice whispered in the darkness, close enough that I could feel breath on the back of my neck. I kept walking. My hands found a wall, and I followed it, trying to navigate by touch. The breathing stayed with me, sometimes on my left, sometimes on my right, sometimes directly behind me. We know what you want, Bill Davis, the voice whispered. We know what you need. I found a corner and turned, still following the wall. My foot hit something soft, and I heard a grunt of pain. We can give it to you, the voice continued. All the money you need, all the security you want. Just stop walking, just turn around. I kept moving. The wall led me to what felt like a doorway. I stepped through it and immediately felt different air, less stale. I thought I might be in the main hallway. Last chance, Bill Davis, the voice said. Turn around now, or we'll make sure you never leave this place. The lights came back on all at once, bright enough that I had to squint. I was standing in the main hallway, about 20 feet from the employee entrance. My flashlight was clipped to my belt where it should be. I turned around. The warehouse behind me was empty and normal looking. No sign of whatever had been breathing on my neck or whispering in my ear. Ernest found me there 10 minutes later. Power outage? He asked. Something like that. He looked at me carefully. You okay? I followed the rules. Good. That's the only reason you're still standing here. By the end of my second week, I'd developed a routine. Arrive at 11:45, Get my equipment from Ernest, start my patrol at midnight, count boxes, check inventory numbers, radio in every hour, ignore voices calling my name, avoid eye contact with people in red clothes, stay out of forbidden sections, report temperature drops and moving boxes. Follow the rules, survive until morning, collect my paycheck. The incidents continued, but I was getting better at handling them. The voices on the PA system didn't shake me as much. The mysterious figures at the edges of my vision became part of the landscape. The strange sounds and unexplained phenomena were just part of the job. I was learning to live with fear as a constant companion. The money helped. After 2 weeks, I had enough to pay my rent and still have money left over for groceries and gas. For the first time in months, I wasn't choosing between eating and keeping the lights on, but the job was changing me. I jumped at sudden sounds during the day. I avoided mirrors because sometimes I thought I saw movement behind me. I started checking over my shoulder constantly, even when I was nowhere near the warehouse. It gets easier, Ernest told me one night. The fear, I mean. After a while, you learn to live with it. How long have you been living with it? 15 years. Why do you stay? He was quiet for a long time. Because someone has to. Someone has to make sure people like you don't get killed on their first night. People like me? People who need the job bad enough to take it. People who don't have anywhere else to go. I understood what he meant. The warehouse didn't hire people who had other options. It hired people who were desperate enough to work in a place where following mysterious rules was the difference between going home in the morning and disappearing forever. People like me. 3 weeks in, I started keeping notes. Nothing official. Just a small notebook where I wrote down what I experienced each night. The time, the location, what I saw or heard, how I responded. I told myself it was just to help me remember the patterns, to better understand what I was dealing with. Really, I think I was trying to prove to myself that it was all real, that I wasn't losing my mind. The notes painted a picture of a place that shouldn't exist, a warehouse where the normal rules of reality didn't apply, where things that had once been human wandered the aisles calling out to the living, where following a simple set of rules was the only thing standing between survival and something worse than death. But it was real. Every night proved it was real. And every morning I drove home with another night's pay, another step closer to financial stability, another reason to come back and do it all over again. The warehouse had become my life. The rules had become my religion. And somehow, despite everything trying to kill me, I was still alive. I stepped out of the men's room and checked my watch. 3:47 a.m., almost halfway through another shift, and so far the night had been quiet. Too quiet, actually. Ernest always said the quiet nights meant something was building up. I walked back toward Section A with my clipboard, counting the same boxes I'd counted dozens of times over the past 3 weeks. 231 on level 1, 143 on level 2, 187 on level 3. The numbers never changed, but I wrote them down anyway. The PA system crackled to life. Bill Davis. I stopped walking. The voice sounded different tonight, clearer, more real than the distorted sounds I'd heard before. Bill Davis. I know you can hear me. I kept my eyes forward and continued walking toward Section B. Rule 1 was simple. Don't respond to voices calling your name between midnight and 6 a.m. Didn't matter how real they sounded. Your mother called yesterday, Bill. She's worried about you. My hand tightened on the clipboard. My mother had been dead for 8 years, breast cancer. I'd held her hand when she died at Swedish Medical Center. She wants to see you, Bill. She's waiting in the break room. The voice knew exactly what to say, exactly which buttons to push. I forced myself to keep walking, but my legs felt heavy, like I was walking through mud. She says she misses you. She says she's sorry she couldn't stay longer. I reached Section B and started counting. 43 boxes on level 1. The voice continued talking, describing things only my mother would know. The way she used to make pancakes on Sunday mornings, how she sang while doing dishes. The last thing she said to me before the morphine took her away for good. "Bill Davis, please. She doesn't have much time." My radio crackled. Ernest's voice cut through the PA announcement. "Bill, you copy?" I grabbed the radio. "Yeah, I'm here. Everything quiet on your end?" I glanced up at the ceiling speakers. The PA system had gone silent. "Yeah, everything's quiet." "Good. Keep it that way." I clipped the radio back to my belt and continued counting. 87 boxes on level 2, 112 on level 3. The numbers matched my previous counts. I moved toward Section C, but stopped when I heard voices ahead. Real voices, not the PA system. A man and woman arguing in low, angry tones. I'd encountered them before. The couple, Ernest said, used to work here. The ones who'd had a bad argument that management couldn't resolve. But this time was different. This time I could hear my name in their conversation. "He's the one," the woman was saying. "He's the one who's been watching us." "Bill Davis," the man replied. "Yeah, I've seen him, sneaking around, listening to private conversations." I crouched behind a shelf in Section B and pulled out my laminated card. Rule 2 said to hide from arguing people, not to intervene. But they were talking about me directly. "We should teach him a lesson," the woman said. "Show him what happens to people who eavesdrop." "Bill Davis," the man called out, his voice echoing through the warehouse. "We know you're there. Come out and face us like a man." I stayed hidden behind the shelf. My heart was pounding, but I remembered Ernest's words. These weren't really people anymore. They were something else wearing the shape of people. "Bill Davis, don't be a coward. We just want to talk." The woman's voice had changed. It sounded sweet now, almost friendly. "We're not angry with you, Bill. We understand you're just doing your job." I heard footsteps moving closer, heavy boots on concrete. The man was walking down the main aisle, searching. "Bill Davis, where are you hiding?" The footsteps stopped about 10 feet from my position. I held my breath and pressed myself against the shelf. "I know you're close," the man said. "I can smell your fear." That wasn't something a person would say. I gripped my radio, ready to call Ernest if things got worse. "Leave him alone," the woman said suddenly. "He's not worth our time." "You're right," the man replied. "Let's go back to our argument. We have things to settle." The footsteps moved away. I waited 5 minutes before looking around the shelf. The aisle was empty, no sign they'd ever been there. I stood up and checked my watch. 4:15 a.m. I needed to finish Section C and move on to electronics. That's when the building shook. A deep rumble started somewhere above me, like thunder rolling through the structure. Dust fell from the ceiling as the concrete floor vibrated under my feet. The rumble grew louder. I looked up and saw the shelving units swaying slightly, thousands of boxes shifting on their perches. My radio squawked. "Bill, you feel that?" "Yeah. What is it?" "Structural collapse. 3rd floor, Section 1. You need to get over there now." I checked my laminated card. Rule 3 said to investigate loud crashes or breaking sounds immediately. Running toward noise was mandatory. "Which way to Section 1? "Past automotive, through the loading dock area, follow the sound." I started running. The rumbling got louder as I moved deeper into the warehouse, past Section F, past electronics, past automotive parts. The loading dock area opened up into a wider space with concrete ramps leading to overhead doors. Section 1 was on the far side. I'd never been there before. It was outside my patrol area, but the rules said to investigate structural problems. The rumbling stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something else. Footsteps behind me. Measured, deliberate steps that matched my pace exactly. I turned around and saw him. The man in the red coat. He was about 50 feet away, walking toward me with his hands in his pockets. His coat was expensive looking, bright red like fresh blood. I couldn't see his face clearly in the warehouse lighting, but I could tell he was smiling. Rule 4 said to avoid eye contact and leave immediately if I saw him, but I was supposed to investigate the structural collapse. The rules were contradicting each other. The man in the red coat raised his hand and waved at me. I turned and ran toward Section 1. Behind me, I heard him laugh, a sound like breaking glass. Section 1 was a disaster. The entire third level had collapsed, bringing down thousands of boxes and several shelving units. The wreckage covered half the floor space with twisted metal and scattered inventory everywhere. But that wasn't the worst part. In the middle of the debris, sitting perfectly upright and undamaged, was a single box. It was different from all the others, smaller, no brown cardboard. Instead, it was made of dark wood with metal corners like an old-fashioned chest, and it had no label. I pulled out my laminated card and read Rule 5, report any moving or sound-making boxes to supervisors immediately. But this box wasn't moving or making sounds. It was just sitting there, untouched by the collapse around it. Still, something felt wrong about it. It didn't belong with the other inventory. It looked older, much older. I grabbed my radio. "Ernest, I'm at Section 1. The collapse is bad, but there's something else." "What kind of something else?" "There's a box here. Different from the others. No label." Long pause. "Describe it." "Dark wood, metal corners. Looks like an antique chest. It's sitting in the middle of the wreckage, but it's not damaged." Another pause, longer this time. "Don't touch it. Don't open it. Don't even look at it too long. Mark the location and get out of there." "What is it?" "Something that's been here longer than the warehouse. Something we're supposed to keep contained." I stared at the box. It was about the size of a shoebox, but heavier looking. The wood was so dark it was almost black, and the metal corners had a green patina like old copper. As I watched, the lid shifted slightly, just a millimeter or two, but enough to notice. "Ernest, I think it's opening. Get out of there, now." I started backing away, but the box was definitely opening. The lid rose slowly, revealing a thin line of darkness underneath. Something was inside, something that wanted out. I turned and ran. Behind me, I heard a sound like wind rushing through a tunnel, followed by a low moan that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The man in the red coat was waiting for me at the edge of Section 1. He stood directly in my path, blocking the way back to the main warehouse. I stopped running. Rule 4 said to avoid eye contact and leave immediately, but there was nowhere to go. Behind me, the box was opening wider, and whatever was inside was getting stronger. In front of me, the man in the red coat smiled and took a step forward. "Hello, Bill," he said. His voice was smooth, cultured. "I've been waiting to meet you." I looked down at the floor and started walking to the right, trying to go around him. He moved to block me again. "Don't be rude, Bill. I just want to talk." I kept my eyes on the ground and tried to go left. He stepped into my path. "You can't avoid me forever," he said. "Eventually you'll have to look at me. And when you do, we'll have so much to discuss." Behind me, the moaning sound was getting louder. The box was opening faster now. I grabbed my radio. "Ernest, I'm trapped. The man in the red coat is blocking my exit, and whatever's in that box is getting out." "Hold on, I'm coming." The man in the red coat laughed. "Ernest can't help you now, Bill. This is between you and me." I kept my eyes down and noticed something. The man's shadow was wrong. It was too long, too dark, and it moved independently of his body. "Look at me, Bill," he said. "Just one quick glance. What's the harm?" The moaning behind me turned into a shriek. Whatever was in the box was almost free. That's when Ernest arrived. He came running from the loading dock area, carrying something I'd never seen before, a metal rod about 3 feet long, covered in symbols that hurt to look at. "Get away from him," Ernest shouted at the man in the red coat. The man turned toward Ernest and his smile faded. "This doesn't concern you, old man." "Everything in this warehouse concerns me." Ernest raised the metal rod. "Especially when you start hunting my people." The man in the red coat took a step back. "He's not your people. He's just another desperate fool who doesn't understand what he's gotten himself into. Maybe. But he's followed the rules better than anyone I've seen in 15 years. That makes him mine. Ernest swung the rod in a wide arc. Where it passed through the air, reality seemed to ripple like water. The man in the red coat stumbled backward. "This isn't over," the man said. He looked directly at me, and even though I kept my eyes down, I felt his gaze like ice water in my veins. "We'll meet again, Bill Davis, and next time, you won't have protection." He walked away, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. I didn't look up until Ernest told me it was safe. "Now we deal with the box," Ernest said. We walked back to Section 1. The wooden chest was fully open now, but whatever had been inside was gone. The box itself looked harmless, just an empty container sitting in the wreckage. "What was in there?" I asked. "Something that's been contained for a long time, something that shouldn't be loose in the world." Ernest approached the box carefully and closed the lid with the tip of his metal rod. "But that's not your problem anymore." "What do you mean?" Ernest looked at me with something like respect. "You followed all the rules tonight, even when they contradicted each other. You investigated the collapse like you were supposed to. You avoided the man in the red coat until I could get there. You didn't touch the box, even when it was opening right in front of you." He picked up the box using a piece of canvas from the wreckage, wrapping it carefully. Most people would have panicked. Most people would have broken at least one rule, but you kept your head and made the right choices. We walked back toward the main warehouse floor. The building felt different now, calmer, like a storm had passed. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you go back to your patrol. Finish your counts. Clock out at 6 a.m. like always." Ernest paused. "But things will be different from now on. You've proven yourself tonight. Whatever's in this place, it knows you're not easy prey." We reached the main aisle. Ernest headed toward the office with the wrapped box while I returned to my clipboard and radio. "Ernest," I called after him. He turned around. "Will it get easier?" He thought about that for a moment. "No, but you'll get better at handling it." I spent the rest of the shift finishing my patrol. Section D, Section E, Section F, electronics, automotive parts. The same routine I'd followed for 3 weeks. But something had changed. The warehouse felt less hostile, still dangerous, but no longer actively hunting me. At 5:45 a.m., Ernest found me in Section A, completing my final count. "Time to go," he said. We walked to the employee entrance together. The morning air was crisp and clean, a sharp contrast to the stale atmosphere inside. "Same time tomorrow?" I asked. Ernest nodded. "Same time tomorrow. But Bill?" "Yeah?" "You're not just surviving anymore. You're part of this place now. That comes with responsibilities." I didn't ask what he meant. I figured I'd find out soon enough. I drove home through the empty streets, watching the warehouse disappear in my rearview mirror. For the first time since I'd started working there, I wasn't afraid of going back. I was actually looking forward to it.